Hey, glory to Jesus Christ, glory forever. It's Father Anthony, and today we've got a special show. Tomorrow we'll do Saturday morning show with Dr. Gail Woloshak on orthodoxy and vaccines. But today we've got our good friend Father Gregory Jensen. Gregory Jensen, they can see you now.
Okay, great. You're looking quite fine in that little circle picture. So, but that's okay. We're talking, not waving at each other.
There we go. Yeah. So, all right. Let me. These are weird times, and politically, we've got the election coming up. So
Yeah.
when you're preaching, um, you make sure you tell everybody not by words, or else you'll lose your 301c3 whatever it is status, right? But you let them know who they should vote for, right?
I kind of try to avoid that as best I can. Uh, you know.
Well, but it's obvious. It's obvious which candidate Christians should vote for.
Well, it's funny. Even as we were even as I was waiting for your phone call to arrive, your Skype call, a young Catholic priest friend of mine responded to something I posted on Facebook, video by an evangelical Christian who, as we say in the social sciences, de-aggregated the data on abortion and showed how little who the president is seems to matter. And he just tore into me. My priest friend there, because I don't know why. So I'll read it later. They should vote for Joe Biden. It's just it's more complicated than that, isn't it?
It is. It is. And hopefully
You know,
everyone, I don't think maybe a new viewer might think I was being serious about saying that there was one to vote for.
yeah,
Um,
right, yeah,
no. The point is, as pastors, we're trying to encourage people to independently work in the world, as Christians,
right,
right?
yeah.
And why would you, even if you had a sense of who it should be, why would you deprive someone the freedom of making that choice?
Well, and yeah, I think I think one of the things that we fall into as pastors is we forget really the limit of our um, ability to influence people's decisions and their behaviors. Um, I can't actually make someone vote in a particular way because, among other things, I'm not there in the voting booth with them when they're pulling the lever, or if you're in Wisconsin like I am, filling in the little circle. Um, I think a lot of times when we talk about politics in a very partisan and directive fashion, I mean, certainly we frame it as giving moral guidance, but I think we need to be um, open to the possibility that we're really satisfying our own egos. Um, yeah, I mean, to be very direct about it, I want to make sure people know who the right person to vote for is, and make sure that they feel bad about themselves if they're not doing what I know is right, and as an added bonus, possibly harm my relationship with them. All right, that last part was offered ironically, but
Well,
I do think a lot of times we end up getting so consumed about partisan politics that we're willing to undermine our relationship with our parishioners. At least some are.
yeah, well,
I'm
but over
yeah.
time, if you're that kind of a priest who, is politicizing things, over time the culture will develop around that expectation, and you'll end up with, you know, very little gap between the political tribe and the theological
Yeah,
tribe.
yeah. And this is one of the things I think about this a lot because I don't really have friends. Um, that one of the things that I think a lot of times we misunderstand uh, in the church is that America is a nation of 325 million people, and the law of large numbers say that I can always probably get enough people together to sustain a parish. So if I let myself, as you say, close the gap between the church and the political tribe, that doesn't mean that my parish is going to close. In fact, in a certain kind of way, it might even be more successful because I'll be attracting people who agree with me politically. But to do that means that we've subtly, or maybe not so subtly, shifted the focus from Jesus Christ to the next election, and I don't think I don't think that's a good thing to do. So we have to be, somewhat more discerning than just looking at, empirical metrics like, well, my people are happy and money's coming in and the church is full on Sunday, but yeah, but, how hard is that to do? Yeah. So does that make sense?
It does. It does.
Yeah.
And certainly, I've been to parishes where it was the case where I'm like, man, there's no way there are any conservatives in this congregation, and I've been to ones where I'm like, there's no way a liberal could ever, find community in this kind of community.
Yeah. I had two former parishioners send me a note. They lean well to the right. But their parish priest tends to post things that are pretty explicitly left leaning, and he does that in a rather exclusive fashion. And they told me they're done. They're done with the church. They're walking away from the parish, and I'm afraid they might walk away from the Orthodox Church. I mean, I made some recommendations for parishes in their area. But they're just tired of feeling like they have to vote for Joe Biden in order to be Orthodox Christians. On the other hand, and I mean, as you say, I know parishes where people are told or made to feel that if they don't vote for Donald Trump, somehow they have failed. They have failed Christ. They failed the Orthodox. They failed as Orthodox Christians. And this is extraordinarily unhelpful, and it's simply not true.
Yeah, just speaking just about the politics, it's a very superficial understanding of policy to think that it only has one dimension.
Right?
And by dimension, I don't mean you have practical, you have moral. No, I mean more than one moral way of framing it, right?
Right, yeah.
And one of the things that I've appreciated you saying many times is to be charitable.
Yeah.
About the motivations of others and their moral frame.
Right.
But also be charitable when you're putting stuff out there in recognition that when people disagree with you, they're not engaging on that moral frame. It's very rare.
It really is. We've seen here in Madison, and we've seen it in other places too. About with the pandemic, we need to follow the science. Excuse me. And I've tried to point out to people that following the science is not really a public policy statement; it's a slogan. And among other things, when you say follow the science, you've got to ask which sciences are you going to follow. And I remember early on pointing out that there's going to be a lot of economic hardship as a result of the lockdowns, and that there would be secondary physical and mental illness as a result of the lockdowns. And people, some people just ripped right into me. One person said, "Well, pick nine of your 10 friends you want to see die." But we're seeing it now in Madison. Our the suicide rate for teenagers and young adults is is jumping up. I mean, we've already not beat, but we've had more teenage and adolescent suicides through October than we had all of last year. So I mean, the point is, follow the science. You've got to understand that there are different sciences. There are different moral values that have to be weighed relative to each other. It's true with the pandemic, and it's true in the voting booth. There are a number of different things that we have to evaluate. There's no question that abortion is a great moral evil. But the question is, do we want to make a statement that we believe, that we say that abortion is a great moral evil, or do we want to bring down the number of abortions? Basically, do we want a virtue signal, or do we want fewer abortions? And I'm not accusing one side or the other of being indifferent or just virtue signaling, but the reality is, the first question you have to ask is, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish through my vote? And then, what is the likelihood that my vote is actually going to contribute to that process, to that outcome? So,
yeah, and so you went straight to one of the most charged issues, right, of abortion.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
and you showed, this isn't. You made clear. Look, there's no more ambiguity here.
Right.
But if we're going to look at it as a political issue, okay, figure out what's on the other side of it, right? Who are you doing this for? Who are you making the moral claim for?
Right.
Is it on behalf of the unborn? Is it on behalf of your own, need to fit in with your tribe? What's going on here?
Right.
And one of the things that we talked about before is this idea of transcendent introspection.
Right.
And to develop the ability to call yourself on that kind of stuff. Yeah.
I mean, maybe to shift from politics for a moment, just maybe to the family, and maybe things make it a little bit clearer. I mean, as priests, at one point or another, we all get that phone call or that conversation after liturgy. Father, my kid is going to do X, and it's going to be a disaster. They're going to marry someone they shouldn't marry, for example, or they're taking out, they're undertaking, they've got sort of a moral project of one kind or another that's not helpful. And we get the question, well, what should I do? And my answer is always the same. Ask yourself how you want your kid to think about you, 2 seconds after this all crashes down around them. That's the moral imperative. When your child fails, when that marriage ends in divorce, when that major turns out to be utterly vapid, how do you want your kid to think about you? Do you want them to think, mom and dad have always been on my side even when they disagree? Or do you want them to think, mom and dad are going to give me a lecture about being stupid? Translate that into the political realm, and we'll stick with abortion because it's supercharged. How do you want a young woman who's contemplating or thinking about an abortion to think about you on the, at that moment? In fact, to the people who are, for those of us who are pro-life, are we even in a position where people who are thinking about abortion know that they can talk to us or feel comfortable talking to us? I think that matters more than that. And under the current circumstances, under the current policy that we have in the U.S., I think that relationship question matters more than the voting question. To be direct with you, my vote for this or that candidate is not going to decrease the likelihood of abortion, my ability to have a conversation with a young woman who finds herself unexpectedly pregnant, however, that actually could result in some immediate good. Is this making any sense?
It
It's
is.
hard because I
It
can't see
is.
you,
So,
though I can hear the birds.
yeah, so it is making sense. So this idea
Yeah,
of relationship is, that's theology, being available. And,
yeah,
this other part, about the theology of facts and of right
yeah,
judgment, this is, there has to be a way for that, even if we were really good at it, there has to be some kind of pipeline through which that flows.
yeah.
And sloganeering and the memification of conversations ain't it.
No, and you know, having conversations, especially public conversations, whether with family, friends, on social media, where I demonstrate my conviction that you're operating out of malice, is that you're a bad person. This is not helpful. I tell my own congregation, I think about it as the you're ugly and your mother dresses you funny approach to conversation. It may be true that you are ugly and your mother dresses you funny. You are neither of these things, just for point of clarification. However, if I begin our chat by saying you're ugly and your mother dresses you funny, you're probably not going to listen to me. I certainly am not inclined to listen to people who begin by lecturing me or by pointing out that I'm a bad person, or and maybe that's my lack of humility, but or maybe the other person is just a jerk.
Yeah, those play
Maybe
into
both are
it.
true.
And this is why,
Pardon me.
yeah, I think they both play into that, your pride and, so
Yeah,
on.
yeah,
But yeah, conversations right now are not to develop relationship. And, we've talked before about, um, the label of being a racist right now.
right.
It's just unhelpful. It's not diagnostic. It's,
No,
there's nothing useful in it. The only use of it
no,
is to drive a wedge between people and to establish
right,
power relationships.
right. And we can multiply that. It's not just a matter of flinging around the term racist, but also rhino. Um, Republican in name only. Um, I think both sides of the political divide are inclined to label others in a way that's not helpful. That, as you say, is not diagnostic. That has the effect of shutting down the conversation rather than opening up the conversation. Um, Labels that absolve me from having to do the hard work of understanding my neighbor, to say nothing of my family member. You know, I was talking to someone recently. Their oldest child, the family is fairly politically conservative, culturally conservative. The child's gone to a fairly liberal university, and has come back saying that all Trump voters are racists. To which Dad responded, "You do know that like half the people in your family, mom, dad, grandparents, aunts, uncles, are going to vote for Trump. Are you really saying that these people who you've known your entire life are racists?" Um, and this sort of unfortunately did not take the kid up short. It was just sort of a doubling down on the argument, but we fall into that. I mean, we think that the people who are voting for Trump are racists, and the people who are voting for Biden want to kill babies.
Yeah,
And maybe we need to get.
yeah, and confirmation bias and our ego, it's all of it is built. Noetic effect of the fall. It's all built to
Yeah.
reinforce this thing that divides us. But that's not the goal of the
It,
Christian. Is we explicitly are called
no.
to be one, right? And not us against them,
Right.
but to bring everyone, you
Right.
know, into the truth.
Eh, Right. And uh, go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, no, it's you.
No, but yeah, and doing that means, and that I have to take into consideration the person's starting point. The fact of the matter is, the first thing I have to ask is, have I established a relationship of sufficient trust with this person so that they're going to accept disagreement from me as being charitably uh, offered. um, or so what kind of a relationship do I have? But then I need to ask myself, what's their starting point? And this is where discernment and prudence comes in. What's the next most reasonable and probable step for this person? What do they need to do next? What is it that they need to do next that they can actually accomplish? Um, when I worked in drug and alcohol units a long time ago, back when, was it Reagan? Yeah, Reagan was president. No, I started when Carter was president, but I don't want to think about that. Um, One of the things when you work with addicts is that you are very appreciative of least noticeable improvements. If someone said, "Yeah, I only shot up 5 times this week," it's like, "No, good for you. It's great because you were like shooting up every day last month." It's like, that's not a good thing to shoot heroin 5 times a week, but it's better than shooting heroin 7 times a week. So with the addict, you look for that little improvement. Well, I think that's actually probably a pretty good model more generally. Um, what's what's the what's the most likely improvement that I can hope to help accomplish this person's life? Um, that is rarely accomplished. That is rarely something that I succeed in doing by giving them a lecture on presidential elections and public policy. Um,
Or the depth of their own depravity.
well, yeah, that's one of my personal favorites. It's like, yeah, it's just, but yeah, but I mean, all kidding aside, yeah, I mean, if I begin the conversation by pointing out to someone how awful they are, um, it surprises people sometimes here in Madison, because again, it's pretty uber progressive that I have gay friends and family members, and they're absolutely convinced that I'm a horrible homophobe, and it's like, I have my disagreements about issues of public policy, but that doesn't mean I don't love my family and friends who are gay. And it certainly doesn't mean that I don't love my parishioners who, maybe think same-sex marriage is a good public policy. Um, I mean, I really strive to, love people, even though we disagree. I fail, certainly. Um, I probably fail more often than not. Um, but, I keep trying. And that means, sometimes not having every conversation that I might want to have with people. You
Yeah.
know,
So we talked about this last week about that takes a certain willingness to accept messy complexity, right?
yeah,
You
yeah,
because there are certain changes you'd love to see in someone's life, right?
right.
But unless it's the right moment, and it
Well,
may not be your role. It may not be your task to
right.
point them on. in any direction in that dimension of their
Right.
life.
Yeah. Well, exactly. A lot of times when I'm especially when I'm hearing confessions from people who are, you know, our age or my age, because you are significantly younger than me, you whippersnapper, you. But they'll struggle with resentment uh, from the family and growing up and things like that. And a lot of times I'll hear people, adults complain about their parents. And, I usually say, most of us have good enough parents. You grew up, maybe you went to college, you had a career, you're married, you have children yourself. Your parents were good enough. And, when I say that, they say, well, I think my mom or my dad's disappointed with me. And I say, well, there are probably areas in which they are disappointed, but my guess is what they wanted most for you was what you have, a good marriage and lovely children. And they'll usually stop and go, yeah, you're right. That's what parents want. Parents want their children to grow, to be well married and to have loving children. That said, no mother, no father is going to try to, marry off their 3-year-old. Child's just not old. I mean, their child's just not old enough to be married. They're going to wait until their child is at a place where in their lives where marriage is psychologically and physically and morally possible. That we have to have that in the back of our minds, that we don't want to rush someone to make a decision that they are not yet ready to make. It's like trying to marry off your 3-year-old. You're going to do an immense amount of harm, and I like that image because it's monstrous. We immediately understand what a great evil it would be to try to marry off a 3-year-old. Well, I'm not saying that a lot of these conversations are the moral equivalent of that, but a lot of times we do a lot of damage to people by trying to get them to make a decision before they are morally equipped to do so.
Yeah, yeah. So
And
we've done the math for
yeah,
them, though. We've done the math. We've figured it out, and we know what is best for them. They're not mature enough to develop it on their own, and so we tell them, and we use all the powers of our manipulation and control to ensure that they come to the right decision, right? That
right.
I love the way you framed it. This is
And
this is just it's perverse. It's perverse because you're not pastoring that other person.
it really is.
You're controlling them.
It's literally perverse. Yeah. Well, you're just, when I do that, I'm seeing things in the wrong way. I've got to respect human freedom. Um, uh, excuse me. A couple of weeks ago, I wrote an essay for the Acton Institute on the Social Progress Index. And it's interesting. The United States does not do particularly well in that index, especially in terms of minority, the experience of minorities in America. And this is racial and sexual minorities, religious minorities. And I do what social scientists do. I disaggregated the data. I went to the methodological section and tried to figure out, well, when you say, people on the margin of American society aren't happy, what do you mean? And what I discovered is that their measure at that point was a mix of things. It was whether or not there was societal acceptance of same-sex marriage, access of women to abortion and contraception services, likelihood of violence, or when encountering law enforcement, and then also there were questions of perception. How do you perceive yourself in different situations? And so it was kind of a mix of objective and subjective measures. It was feeling basically feeling unwelcome or unsafe because of maybe bad laws, but also, honestly, individual moral failings, um, social structures, and it was a mix. And so it really, from a sort of a sociological point of view, did not give a lot of really good hard information. But I stepped back, and one of the things I said in my essay is like, for whatever reason, my neighbor does not feel welcome. That's what matters. And that's I think when we look at people who are making these very strident political statements, it's easy to overlook the fact that for all the harm that they are likely going to do, these are also things said by people who themselves do not feel safe, who do not feel welcome.
Yeah, so we've got two jobs ahead of us, right?
Yeah, we do.
One is
Yeah,
to provide a safe place, to do
yeah,
that policy work, the hard work,
yeah, and it
not the
is hard.
propaganda work. But then we've also got to build the relationships. So I remember once I had something terrible happen to me when I was younger. Um, I was very upset with myself because I was trying to provide input on a technical question,
Mhm.
right? And I gave the wrong advice. I completely misunderstood the nature of the technology, and so I gave advice that was just wrong,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And in in the next email that I sent as part of this, discussion, I said, look, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to find someone who actually understands the technology, right?
Yeah.
Well, the person who was heading up the project thought I was talking about him,
Oh,
right? Never forgave me. Never believed
no.
that this was self-deprecating and I wasn't attacking him, right?
Right.
And so, I was shocked because and I mean I worked with him for many years after that. He never forgave me. And
No.
here's the thing, right? Not only, did I write poorly, right? I could have written clearly, but it was easy for him to believe that I was that guy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And, yeah.
if it's easy for somebody to believe that you're a racist, that you don't care about somebody, okay, you've got work to do.
I yeah, I do. And and so we're clear. I mean, a lot of times that's not work that I'm up for or that I don't have the skills for, and that's okay. But um, but then I need you know, to make a new set of decisions. Um, the Chaplains Association at the university where I work with OCF. Most of the people there skew, well to the left, and over the years I've realized they don't actually necessarily want to hear what I have to say, even if they ask me. And I need to stop beating my head against the wall, but I also need to remember that they probably are no more interested in some of the moral teachings of the Orthodox Church than I'm interested in the moral decisions of contemporary mainline Protestantism, and that's okay. We're not there to be best buddies. Aristotle's helpful here. Not all friendships are, true friendships in the full sense. Many of our friendships, many of our relationships are utilitarian. It is to get a job done. And that's fine. Most of the people we meet, most of the time, it's just about getting from A to B. It's just about getting, some task done.
And if you do
And,
that
and and
well,
that's yeah, and that's okay. Yeah.
if you do
Yeah.
that well, it
Sorry.
can lay the groundwork for something more, or not.
Exactly. Yeah. And something more is great, but something not. I mean, that's fine too. There is, I think, a tendency, and I mean, you see it in religion, but you also see it in politics, to substitute tribal affiliation for, a wholesome sense of self. Psychologically, our a wholesome sense of self grows out of increasingly significant accomplishments. A lot of times we want to take a shortcut. I don't want to do the hard work of feeling good about myself. I'm just going to latch on to a particular political agenda, and I'm going to use that as my ego shield. It's like, I'm a great person because I have the right policy views. And so there's no mistake. There are morally correct policy views. But holding those views does not make me a good person. And it certainly is not a sufficient source for a sense of my own value as a human being, to say nothing of a child of God.
Yeah, so could we do that with our orthodoxy?
Why, yes, we can. I'm teaching the dogmatic theology class for the first year deacon students, and one of the things I come back to again and again with them is always be on guard and resist the temptation to simplify the gospel. Don't make it a work of your own ego. And oh yeah, by the way, remember that in fact what we preach is not orthodoxy but Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ is the content of the gospel. Jesus Christ is the content of orthodoxy. All the stuff that we, whether we're talking about the New Testament or the conciliar decrees or the teaching of the Father, this is an articulation of the church's encounter with Jesus Christ. But what you see instead is you see sometimes people, rather than opening themselves up in humility to Jesus Christ, they skip ahead to the things which are secondary, the scriptures, the fathers of the church, and we use that, and it's no different than, say, the husband who, well, this is kind of stereotypical, maybe from our father's generation, but who say, well, I'm a good husband. I work hard. I put a roof over my kids' heads. I put food on the table, clothes on their back. Why do they need to talk? Why do I need to say I love you? So so we do it all the time. We substitute objective measures for subjective commitment. And yeah, certainly this happens in the Orthodox Church. It would be indiscreet of me to name names, but
yeah, and Saint Paul, this isn't just Father Gregory. I mean, Saint Paul understood things pretty well, and he had a lot that he could have been proud of in a worldly sense. Church building, his studies, his intelligence, all this kind of stuff. But he says, I don't boast in anything but Christ. If I boast in anything on my own, I boast in my infirmities. Because it's that humility that allowed him to accept Christ and to know him well. And but because we've got orthodoxy, we can skip that step.
Well, yeah. No, I think that does happen. As you were talking, I was thinking about a talk I heard a couple of years ago. It was given by an evangelical Christian who's a professor at Fuller Theological, psychology professor at Fuller, and he's also a pastor of a small Asian church in the Los Angeles area. And in the course of his talk, he said, there's been this great church growth movement, and he didn't want to in any way disparage it. But he said, we've fallen into the mindset that the successful pastor is the pastor of the largest church in town. And then he stopped and he said, and he confessed quite eloquently that he has fallen into that he, here he is, he's a full professor. He speaks at international conferences. He's a sought after consultant. And he pastors a church of maybe 30, 40 people on Sunday morning. And he was thinking, well, maybe I'm a bit of a failure as a pastor for all of my worldly success. And so he said he went down on his knees and he asked God. And the answers that came back to him is that no, he was doing exactly what God would have him do. That God had set him aside for these 30 or so people. And that really took a great deal of humility on the part of this man. We're Orthodox, so if we have 30 people in church, but we know the bishop's going to elevate our parish to a cathedral soon because we're huge. But for my evangelical colleague, that was really a hard thing to admit, that he had a small congregation and that he was at peace with having a small congregation. He had no aspirations for anything larger. I think really he was able to submerge his own ego and in that moment and abandon himself in obedience and love to Jesus Christ. And that's what we have to do. We don't have to win the next election, though God knows I'd love to win the next election.
Yeah, great. Yeah,
yeah.
Way to tie that back in. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
So there's something else that I want to bring up. We've
got
please. Maybe if you got another 15 minutes or so.
I do.
And I'm going to ask you to talk about a book that you haven't read. So.
Oh yeah, I saw the title, man.
Yeah. So Rod Dreyer's got this book out, Live Not by Lies, and
right.
I love reading Rod Dreyer, and even when I don't agree with him, like the Benedict option, I'm like, I love what you're trying to do there. I can't agree with your historiography.
Right.
I don't think your solution is quite right, but man, we more of you. Yes. This book I love so much because part of my formation early on was receiving and reading Solzhenitsyn's the Gulag Archipelago.
Right.
And that just led me to this. I just fell in love with the dissidents, right? And then when I learned Russian and I really immersed myself in the Russian culture and Soviet culture, my love for them, my respect for them grew, and I just saw how strong they were and what great witnesses they were,
right?
And how that was tough. That was a tough thing that they went through, and they didn't see any. There wasn't any worldly reason for their hope, right? They didn't know the effect that their actions would have on communism, right? On the Eastern Bloc. They were just doing it out of a commitment to virtue. That's even making it sound superficial. Just a willing to, don't live by lies. Just to tell the truth. And that looked different for many different kinds of dissidents. There are gray men and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, but my question for you is a kind of basic one. So once we've said, yes, that's right, yeah, in our culture, to the extent that it's given over to propaganda and both the right and the left have a cancel culture, right? There's an intolerance, right? And there's, if it's not lies that are dominating the politics, it's pretty close. If you go and, like last night, we had the debate. The country had the debate between our presidential candidates, and so when it was over, I couldn't sleep last night. So I got up and I said, okay, I'm going to read the analysis. And I went and I read the Fox News analysis and I read the CNN analysis, right? And both of them were all about the lies that the other one told, right? that was the finding, wow, Trump told these whoppers, and he said it in a civil voice, right? And then the other one said, look at all these lies that Biden told.
Yeah.
And oh my goodness. So live not by lies. It's we need to be committed to the truth. Whether we make it a categorical imperative or whatever, that's your category.
Yeah,
You're the moral theologian. My
yeah,
question, though, as you know, someone who's interested in epistemology and how do you know truth? How? So if I say,
yeah.
yes, I'm dedicated. I'm gonna fight this change by standing on the rock of truth and proclaiming only truth. I've kind of already gone into it wrong.
Yeah. Um, like I said, I've not read Rod Dreyer's book. Um,
I recommend it.
I have to admit a certain. Okay, I have to admit I have a certain skepticism, because at least one thing I saw that he wrote, is that he wrote "Live Not by Lies" because he realized the Benedict that what he wanted to do in the Benedict option wasn't possible because the bad people wouldn't let that happen. Um, so I have to admit a certain skepticism about a book where the author is saying, "Well, my last book I was wrong, but now in this book I've got it right." Um, but I had and you touched on it a second ago. A lot of my professors in college and graduate school, lived under communism, both in Eastern Europe and Vietnam, and and they simply tried to be faithful as best they could in the moment. They weren't, um, they weren't in a sort of a programmatic fashion proclaiming the truth. They were just trying to live and they were trying to survive and get through the next day. Um, I how I think once we actually when I know what Solzhenitsyn meant, live not by lies. Um, but my first sort of almost maybe cynical psychoanalytic question is, which lies am I not supposed to live by? Um, what I mean, and obviously I'm not supposed to live by any of them. But I do know myself well enough to know that I pick and choose the lies I'm willing to tolerate in myself and others. So, um, what I would say is take a look inside, and what are the things that are not true that you're willing to sort of pass over in silence. Um, I have a young friend who wrote his dissertation about the Great Schism, and one of the things that he discovered he's an Orthodox scholar, about the Great Schism is that the Great Schism wasn't all that particularly great, and there were lots of things that were ambiguous on both sides. But on that score, recently one of my parishioners asked me about the sacking of Constantinople in 1204, and then the earlier slaughter of the Latins in 1186 in Constantinople. And he said, "What do you think about that?" And I was like, "Well, it's wrong." Which? Both. I think it's lovely not to live by lies, but the thing about Solzhenitsyn is that he wasn't shy about criticizing his own team. And I think that's what we've got to do if we're not going to live by lies, is criticize ourselves and our own team. But to the epistemological question, how do we know the truth? I think the truth captivates us, and it stills us. I am very skeptical of a book that makes living not by lies an agenda item. unlike you, when I read the Benedict Adoption, I thought Pryor's analysis, cultural analysis, was pretty good. But these things, truth develops organically. It doesn't. It's not something that lends itself to a to-do list, because that list always misses things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what's captivated you? What seems to still you to silence your own ego?
Right.
I'm not you personally, but
Yes, I hear
all
you.
of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And to live in that space, and to be
Yeah.
authentic in that space. And
Yeah.
that's what the dissidents were doing. They were living in that
Yeah.
space, whether they were
Right.
doing it with their family or they were doing it in the gulag.
Yeah. I again, because and I'm not to pick on Rod, who is a good guy. I very much I've enjoyed my conversations with him online and things like that. But I notice, and now I'm going to criticize my own team, because I write for the Act Institute. I write about free markets and the ethical foundations of capitalism and all that other good stuff. And I write about pro-life issues, things like that. A lot of the stuff I read coming out of the more conservative voices in the Orthodox Church seem to me to be written by people who live themselves in fairly conservative parts of the country. I live in Madison, Wisconsin. The default response here is that I am a homophobic misogynist. I am everything that is wrong with Western culture. None the least of which is because I love Western culture and I think Aristotle is cool, even though he owned slaves. I think the thing I've had to learn is that I live in Madison, Wisconsin, where nobody particularly likes me or what I stand for. I don't feel oppressed. I don't feel at risk.
So I would
I,
imagine
I'm
that
at peace. I don't like it here, but I'm at peace. Go ahead.
I would imagine that, and I agree. I have a problem with people who self-identify as culture warriors. Then the live not by lies becomes a slogan, a thing to beat other
Well,
people
yeah,
in the head with.
yeah,
People imagine, though, and they may be right, they certainly feel like they are being treated poorly, that their truth
yeah,
is not being told because of they're living so much of
yeah.
their life online. So even though they do live, in a comfortable
Well,
suburban
yeah,
setting, right? When they go online, they see, the journalism and social media
yeah,
going against things that they hold dear.
yeah. See, yeah, and I get that, and I had a real struggle when we first landed in Madison. But I think you're right. I think a lot of this concern is self-generated because of spending too much time on social media, getting way more stimulus than you can process about politics. And the I remember years ago we went back to Connecticut. My wife and I went back to Connecticut. My grandmother was dying, and we were staying at her house, but neither here nor there. But we turned on the TV and we were watching the local news, and the lead story was about a murder in Brooklyn. And my wife said, "Why are they talking about Brooklyn?" I said, "Well, if it bleeds, it leads." But I think a lot of times we end up ingesting a lot of information that's just not particularly helpful. I'm thinking of St. Paul here. All things are all things are licit, but not all things are helpful. And I think it tends to turn us into sloganeers. We're gonna not live by lies, and and I think Solzhenitsyn would agree. The very first thing that I should say when I say I will live not by lies is realize that when I say that, that's a lie.
Hmm. Yeah, it's something to work towards.
I mean, that is something to work towards.
So
But
let me just put in a plug for his book, right? This is
okay,
this if you're because he's presenting stories. Now he doesn't present everybody's story. I mean their whole arc of it. He's pulling out bits and pieces of
right,
these dissonants. But what comes out is a story of compassion, of people who they live in that space of authenticity wherever they are, but they do it in a way that isn't sloganeering. You know,
right,
they're they're just being themselves, and they're being compassionate, and they're being
yeah,
true in a capital T sense.
yeah,
And so there's not this walling off
yeah,
that he was accused of presenting in the Benedict auction. In fact, he pointed out that he said, look, small groups. This is we got to be about small groups, and we should be
yeah,
doing it anyways, and we should be doing it also because if we do slide into this soft totalitarianism is what he calls it, then we'll have the
yeah,
tools to maintain our dedication to truth and our authenticity.
yeah.
But one of the things that he says, I want to show you, just give you an example of
Please,
these things that he's struggling with, right? He says, what we learn from some of these examples is that they wouldn't wall themselves off. So, you have this idea of working in cells, right? So you protect
right,
but
yeah,
no, that doesn't work. It doesn't work if you're trying.
no,
So, so he says, you just accept the fact that your group is infiltrated, and you
right,
just love anyways.
yeah. I when I taught social ethics last year seminary, one of the things I pointed out to the students, because that Benedict doctrine came up at one point, is that it's impossible to wall yourself up from the surrounding culture, and the reason for that is that people are always carriers of culture, and so the only way to keep the culture outside is to build up walls, and to not allow people to pass through the membrane. But then, of course, internally, you have to become increasingly totalitarian. You have to become increasingly controlling. See, you know, what I would agree with uh, Dreyer, is the overarching point that you make. But what I would say is, if you're worried about soft totalitarianism and you're a conservative, move to Madison. Come live here, or Berkeley, or Austin. Go live someplace where you are in the minority, and be that yeast in the dough. If you're worried about Trumpian racism, and you're a liberal, well, go find a red state. Go live there. Go be yeast in the dough. There is, I think, a very important and substantial difference between what we're facing in the United States today and what was going on during the Soviet Union. Is that um, we are not. This is not a totalitarian state. We are not being rounded up and sent to gulags. We have a great deal of freedom of movement and association, and and honestly, it's better now than it was when I was born, at least in some measure. But we are not in the Soviet Union. We are not facing that kind of a challenge, and we never will. Not because things can't become bad, but because the Soviet Union is gone, and that was the challenge of that time, and we need to face the challenge of our own time. But I like the Desert Fathers, and the Desert Fathers tell me that I need to go to the place. I need to go face the demons, and those demons are ultimately in my heart. So, if you want, again, to come back, if you want to live not by lies and you're a conservative, go live someplace progressive. If you're a progressive and don't want to live by lies, go live someplace conservative. Go make friends if you're. I mean, here in Madison, people don't make friends across political lines, and the political line here is not liberal conservative, but progressive and liberal. Go and live with the people that you disagree with. I don't see that coming out of a lot of, again, my own tribe. I don't see that as a recommendation coming out of a lot of conservative thought. And I have learned living in Madison that, whatever the other differences are, basically people on the left and the right are both feeling pretty persecuted and pretty marginalized. And it amazes me how the conversations I hear at the university sound like the conversations I hear at Acton.
Right. Yep. So that's the dynamic that, and so that's the challenge of our day, right?
It is.
And we can learn from those who have how the people face their challenges, but not tactically.
Right. No.
What is it that gave them virtue? What was it that allowed them to be true, that allowed them to be authentic? And if we do that thing, we don't have to, figure out the tactics. Our authentic response will be virtue.
And, Jesus says in the gospel, you'll be called for kings and rulers of this world to testify on my behalf. Fear not what you will say, for at that time you will be given words. This is part of the charismatic life of the church, is that God will inspire us with words and deeds, in the moment.
And for us, we need to start wrapping this up. I'm going to have to get going. But for us, part of that authenticity and the reaction to the very real challenge to our civilization is, it seems to me that if I'm going to respond authentically as a Christian, it is to do what you said, to love and to know the people on the other side, right?
Yeah.
And to be a witness of that active listening without judgment, that valuing without agreement, that is going to break down those barriers, and to get our information through those personal relationships, and to accept that as real, rather than what is being done to us is it's you were pointing out how the story about Brooklyn, murder in Brooklyn. Why is this on the local news, right? This is what we're falling prey to, is an economy, an information economy that is set up to divide. That's its money making way, and we've got to transform that, and we can transform that.
We really do. And I mean, just real quick, to go back to Dreyer's book, if we were really facing an environment, if we were really facing a political and cultural situation of soft totalitarianism, his books wouldn't get published.
Yeah, samizdat. This is very different. Very different situation. Yeah, thank God. Thank God.
This doesn't mean that there aren't problems, but it doesn't mean we can't learn. But Father Robert Sirico, and I'll leave with this, made a very good point at Acton a couple of years ago. He said, the fathers of the church developed an ethic for persecution and poverty The problem is that what we now face are the challenges of unbounded freedom and prosperity. You know, we don't know how to live in an environment where we can do effectively anything we want. It's gotten to the point now where I can simply deny the biological nature of my own sex, and that's acceptable. We have no idea what to do. And that's only possible because we are extraordinarily free from external constraints, and we have a huge amount of wealth, and we don't know what to do with any of that.
Yeah, and our instincts
So
for dealing
here
with
ended
it
the list.
are
Yeah.
are not always useful. So let's be humble.
No, and they're tribal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're trouble. So let's be humble. Let's reach across and know the other.
Yeah.
And we're going to work this out. We're going to work this out.
Yeah, we are.
Well, Father Gregory, thank you so much for your time. I always appreciate that.
Absolutely, Father Anthony. Good time.
And I look forward to our next time. Until then,
All right, good enough.
Godspeed.